Hello all, and thank you for joining me today, and welcome to the LawComms webinar looking closely at what journalists want from your legal content. I really do appreciate you all taking an hour out of your day today away from what is turning out to be a pretty nail-biting US election, but I think there's a few more days until we find out the results on that front. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tom Rosillo, and I am the Managing Director of LawComms, which is a specialist legal PR firm. I set up the agency after working with a number of law firms on a freelance basis over the past few years. I work closely with my clients to deliver a regular stream of high-value coverage across respected national and international publications, all designed to push key messages and position partners and senior lawyers as the online authority in the area of law in which they operate. But why bother? Well, we're operating in a very crowded market, which due to the current lockdown restrictions is living online, and differentiation has an impact on the bottom line. It is easier to win work when you're known for it. I've seen it happen myself. If you are consistently in the media commenting on big cases and pushing out opinion articles around the areas of law in which you operate, potential clients will find you and turn into new business opportunities. In addition, increased brand mentions and links around a given topic will increase your firm's rankings for key commercial terms in Google, once again, making you more visible to potential clients online. If executed well, you can further amplify your media coverage through other communication channels such as LinkedIn, promoting the fact that lawyers in your firm are regularly featuring them in the national and international press is a very effective but subtle way to stay on the radar of existing clients and referring law firms, which in an increasingly online world where we can't get out and meet each other is absolutely crucial. Additional aims of raising your media profile can be to encourage recruitment, raise awareness of individuals in the market to improve directory rankings, highlight campaigns for law change, charitable endeavors, or the firm's pro bono activity. I'm a firm believer that with the right processes and buy-in at all levels of the firm, driving a regular stream of media coverage doesn't have to be a costly exercise and can be executed with relative ease. I have worked closely with law firms to set up these processes, and today is all about providing you, the attendees, with the knowledge straight from the people who know best, the journalists themselves. So, before I introduce my panelists today, if you would like to ask questions, please use the Q&A function at the end of the session. We will go through as many questions as we can, but hopefully we can get through everybody's. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists for today's event. Panelists, if you can all switch on your video at this point. And don't forget to unmute yourselves. Thank you very much. Switch on to the gallery view, so hopefully everyone can see everyone. So firstly, we have Ed Harris, who is the senior editor at Law 360, the legal newswire, where he's worked for almost 4 years. Before that, he was a news editor at the Press Association and a reporter at the Evening Standard for many years. We are also joined by Jean Hurley, who is a senior commissioning editor responsible for the development of exclusive third-party content covering banking, private equity, and financial crime at Thomson Reuters Regulatory Intelligence. Jean is a graduate from London College of Law. On passing her solicitor exams, she worked for 4 years as a professional support officer at Simmons & Simmons Litigation Department. After that, she entered the world of legal and financial publishing and worked first as the editor of the Encyclopedia of Forums and Precedents, and then went on to develop and commission new products for LexisNexis Butterworths. Finally, we're joined by Edward Fennell, who started his journalist career writing about industrial and employment issues for the Times, but in 1987 became involved in the launch of the newspaper's prestigious New Law section. His perspective has always been that writing about legal issues for the general reader rather than the legal insider. And after 33 years at the Times, he decided that the arrival of COVID was that time to leave, and now produces his own weekly small-scale legal diary available at edwardfennelllegaleventsdiary.com. I will send out a link to everybody after the session, and please do go and visit this. It's a brilliant resource, and I'm a big fan. So that's enough of me. I'd like to kick off the questions for today. So I'm going to start with yourself, Ed. My first question to you today is, you're sent a number of emails every day by law firms across the UK pitching a wide range of content ideas. My first question is just a simple one. How do you prefer to be contacted in the first instance? And what do you look for when publishing a law firm for the first time?
Oh, well, in the old days, or until recently, a phone call was always nice, and invitation to go out for a cup of coffee as well, to do things in a civilized face-to-face way, but we're doing that anymore. So yeah, a email, a press release is good place to start. It would help if the person sending it knew who I was. You'd be surprised how many emails we get to reporters who left, or editors who left a year ago, 2 years ago. Doesn't make a good impression if people don't check. Spell the name right. Don't call me dear sir, madam. Some basics which I'm never surprised by how many people forget to do that. And yeah, keep it short, keep it clear. Just tell me who you are, where you're from, and what you're offering or what you're asking for.
It sounds pretty simple. Get your name right,
yeah, it's not.
and make sure that you're describing what you're pitching in effectively. Have you got anything else to add to that, Jean or Edward?
Well, for me, I think it's important that when you pitch anything, that you're offering something different. You're offering a new view on something, and it's reacting to a regulatory event. You're not just repeating what's being put out, say, by a regulator, that you actually have a view on what's being said. So for me, that's important.
Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, it's very rare these days that I get a phone call. I mean, in the old days, it was really a pain that people seemed to think they could phone me up anytime, day or night, trying to sell me stories. Thank God that that's over. On the whole, the ones I get by phone these days, I always have, almost invariably have to say, stop. It's far better to send me an email. If it's interesting, I'll get back to you. And certainly, I think that exactly as Ed has just said, the approach has to be based on knowledge of what I do and what my publications are. Now that's changed a bit for me when I was at the time as to what I'm doing now. But I think the least one can expect from a PR is they at least know who you are, what you're interested in, and when you actually appear. And it seems to be baffling that as a matter of basic research, that often does not have been the case.
So a big message.
Knowledge of the publication you're talking to, I think, is absolutely vital.
So a big message is make sure you do your research before you look at contacting a journalist in the first instance. I'm just going to come back to yourself, Jean. You obviously regularly pitch content, just like Edward and Ed are. And I know this will differ from kind of publication to publication, but what is generally important to you when deciding whether to publish a piece of content that's come across from someone like myself or a law firm or a lawyer or a partner of a firm?
Well, as both Ed and Edward have said, you've got to know who you're actually pushing the story to. So you have to know the audience. So for me, my product is compliance officers. So when people push something to me, I don't want to see a piece on corporates in general. I want to see it that is aimed at my readership, which are compliance officers. So I think it's very important to know that. So when you're pitching, you need to make sure you know the audience and what it is that they need to know now.
And I guess we've got in the audience today, I know that we've got kind of people, attendees from firms of all sizes. Does it matter to you what size the firm is? Do you do much, if I send you a piece of great content from, a law firm, a smaller law firm, does it differ on your opinion on it? Do you have to know the firm to publish a piece of content from that firm? I guess that question would be to all of you, really.
Yeah. Okay, if I could respond to that. I mean, I think I'd be surprised this isn't true of all of us. What one looking for is authoritative comment, people who really, really know what they're talking about. Now, that can come in some cases from quite a small firm or a startup firm, which you've got somebody who is a real expert who has decided for their own reasons whether to set up independent. So that's what I'm looking for, is deep expertise, experience, and come across in an authoritative way.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't think that the size of the firm doesn't matter at all. And I've published commentary by firms I hadn't heard of, but you do a bit of research. But yeah, Edward's right. What leaps out at you in a good piece is that they've got something to say, not the name on the law firm door.
Yes, and often some of the smaller firms, they don't have client conflicts, so they can have more of a view on something, because some of the larger firms won't talk about certain banks, for instance. Do you come across that?
That's very
Yeah,
true.
Certainly as far as that very point is concerned, as far as banking is concerned, certainly when I was at the time, I often tried to write about banking, but trying to get commentators who are against the banks was almost impossible. So and one or two haven't now emerged, firms who are coming out and positioning themselves out, that was a joy.
I mean, that's quite an interesting point. Hopefully something that the attendees can take away today is that you don't have to be, the biggest law firm in the world. A lot of the firms I work with are relatively small and can make a real impact in the media, because they're, perhaps not held back by,
not part of the establishment.
Exactly.
It can often take a lot longer to get commentary from the point at which it's offered into Law 360 from larger firms, because of the compliance thing and the potential for conflicts of interest. I can get stuff turned around much more quickly from small firms often.
And that leads me on to another point, really. I know myself and you've done pieces together in the past, Ed, and one of the things that you've always mentioned to me is speed. From the point of asking for a comment, or and is that something that you find, like, from your perspective, I certainly have, in my experience, is the faster you can get comment across, the better, really.
I think so. Particularly if it's commentary on something that's just happened, say there's been a sentence handed down, or the serious fraud office has agreed a deferred prosecution agreement, or something that's noteworthy. You want to get something turned around quickly while it's still fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could just come in on that, it was a few years ago, but there was medical negligence article I was writing about in a very specific area, and I knew there was a particular firm who I had occasional contact with. I wanted to interview him. It demonstrates the importance of having somebody in a PR capacity. I could not get hold of anybody in that firm. This was a unique opportunity for them to get their message, and they weren't there. They didn't respond. So availability, speed of response is vital.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've learned, doing this job is that speed is all about having an internal process over at the firm. So what levels of sign off does a comment or a piece have to go through to get it turned around? Obviously that might go to to the most senior person in the firm, but as long as you've got a process there to get that person in between his or her meeting.
I'm just going to step away for a couple of minutes. Just got somebody at the door.
No problem. No problem. I'll hide your video. So I'm going to go on to the next question. And this is to yourself, Edward. When you're kind of looking for articles, or publishing a longer form article, are you looking for stuff in the news agenda, or are you looking for something that's perhaps cropped up that you might not know about already? Obviously the longer pieces in the Times are very difficult to secure, but I guess
I mean, certainly I'm speaking now as far as my experience at the Times is concerned, where basically I wrote a fortnightly feature on what was a topical issue in the law, but the law, as I was saying, as you said in your introduction, something which had a general appeal to the kind of Times audience. And I basically had about 3 days in order to sort that out. And what one's always trying to do, and it may be different in other publications, I had to select a topic which I think would still have news legs in 3 days' time. Sometimes that was difficult. So you had to kind of have a real finger on the pulse of what was an upcoming story, which would then be relevant in 3 or 4 days' time, because of the time it took to research and check back quotes and so on and so on. But so therefore you're relying in a sense on your journalistic instincts. But ideally, I was looking for a subject that I was writing about on a Thursday, which would also have been on the news pages or the business pages, either that day or the day before. But assuming I got that right, I would be approaching the firms, going back to what I was saying earlier, who I thought were authoritative, or who I thought had relevant expertise, but also above all, quotability. Some people can be experts, but be terribly tedious. And what I'm looking for often is, who do I know who are going to give me a really nice quote, and that really comes from experience, the people you've talked to a lot, and you know who are going to be reliable. So I tend to have a slate of my kind of top 20 firms that I would rely on.
So just to come back there to, obviously we're looking for, it's all about strategies that law firms can use to be regular contributors in the media. So if you could give me 3 kind of top tips about how a firm or an individual goes into your, trusted, you've mentioned a couple there. What are they?
Well, certainly. I mean, I, in a sense, I'm restating what we said earlier. You have to be able to. We have to able to trust what they say. They really know what they're talking about. But then after, and that kind of is a given almost with the top firms. But that's why, as we were saying earlier, the smaller firms who have a different angle on it. But it has to be availability, and it's certainly, when you're on a fairly tight deadline, you have to know if I approach them, say, on a Monday morning, I'm going to get feedback from them by the end of the morning, where they're going to be able to talk about that and then do an interview, say, in the early Monday afternoon, something along those lines. So we are in a very, very practical situation here. You have to have people who are responsible and, I was saying, authoritative and so on. So that's what I think, and this is the role played by the in-house PRs, to act as the bridge between me as the journalist and the expert, and who sometimes, frankly, will have to kick the internal expert to be responsive and so on and so on.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. Jean, I'm going to come over to you now. Obviously, we've worked on a couple of articles in the past. Have you got any kind of tips for, the content itself? How, lawyers should be, or solicitors should be structuring their content? How much should be kind of opinion based? How much, is there any kind of tips you can give?
Yes, well, often the pieces that I get pitched or I ask people to write are usually from a story that one of the journalists has written, and it's quite clear that you then need an opinion on it with some advice and some practical tips where you need sort of more of the legal opinion, and you can offer what people should be doing next. So for me, I think it's when you get something that's offered exclusive, so we know it's going to be for my publication. They're not sending it to every publication. They've got the readership in mind, so they're bearing in mind, who the audience are, and they're talking to them. And in the articles, I think by knowing your readership, you don't repeat what everyone knows. In the first paragraph, you want to see you've got to tell them something new. This is why you should be reading it. Then you can put in some background, and then you offer advice, and that's going to give the law firm a lot more gravity with our readers and, a lot more respect. Yeah.
Okay, Ed, do you have anything to add to that? Obviously, when you are working at Law 360, that is based in New York, in the States, and obviously it's got growing readership in the UK as well. Often the articles have to go across to New York to be approved, the longer form pieces that we've done together in the past. What are they looking for when approving a particular?
I think they want, because we are Law 360 UK, distinct from North America and that part of it, they want something that is going to be, about the UK and about events in Europe. So they want it to be, quite clearly something else that's not North America. So, yeah, all the kind of, the kind of stuff we cover, the regulation, Brexit, anything that's distinct to our territory.
Okay. Brill. So Edward, I'm going to come back to you. Obviously, at times you often kind of reported on breaking news effectively, and had to turn around articles very quickly. What are your expectations in terms of delivery? Like, how quickly will you often need something? If a story breaks in the morning and you need a comment from a lawyer, like how quickly would you normally need to get that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, as I was saying, I did features rather than news, although all my features have a news dimension to it. Certainly, when I was at the Times, Francis Gibb in particular was having to respond very, very fast to things. And so that means ASAP, almost immediate, And that tends to perhaps, I suppose, be why, and we're really I'm keeping on saying the same points really. You have to have a bank of firms who you know who are expert in certain areas. You feel you can trust them and they will be responsive. So that means, as far as straight news is concerned, researching something on a Monday afternoon to appear on Tuesday, you need an immediate response. What I was doing slightly longer than that, but only slightly more longer. So it is ASAP. It's always very reassuring if when you send out an invitation. What I normally do when I was writing these features, I would write to a quick email to 5 firms whom I knew, saying, I'm writing about this. Have you got anybody who could answer these sort of questions? And it was always very reassuring if somebody came back in the next 15 or 20 minutes and said yes. And often that speed of response would then shape who I actually spoke to in length.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because as well as commentary, we do news stories every day, and it's really important to us as well to be able to get 2 or 3 lawyers who know what they're talking about for our reporters to be able to interview them that day. And right. There are some who are really good, and some who it's just almost impossible to track down.
Yeah. And if for example something crops up, does that impact the the relationship with that particular firm if you have those issues, like if you, for example, if the firm had agreed to give you a comment and then you never get that comment?
No, absolutely. If I can, I won't name names, but there were several firms who reliable, and this is often based on a long-term relationship with them for whatever reason, the internal politics changed, that I would ask them to comment. The PR would say, yes, of course we will, and nothing happened. So after a bit, those went into my black book, and I never spoke to them again. And that might well have an impact on them subsequently, because there may be something else happens later on when they really, really want to appear, and then frankly, you judge them by their record.
Really?
Yeah.
And certainly if they say they're going to provide a quote and then they fail to, that is a big black mark.
Yeah, our reporters say the same thing. When I ask them what they like and dislike about getting quotes from law firms, they said that what annoys them is when they've, say, got an interview lined up and then the law firm says, oh, sorry, we can't do this, it's a conflict of interest. Or
yeah, quite well, that exactly.
It said, yes, you can talk to this person, and they don't appear. You can never get up.
Quite. Yeah, indeed. And US firms, particularly difficult in that area, actually, I have to say. US firms, yeah. There were some of them. Again, often the London-based PR would say, yeah, that's fine, and then zilch.
Okay. So it sounds like it's pretty straightforward, and I've certainly learned this with my experiences. If you're going to say you're going to do something, make sure you do it.
Yeah,
and
better to say you won't do it flat out, right?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed. Yes.
Have you got any other kind of Jean, Ed, or Edward? Any other kind of big no-nos for kind of PRs or people contacting you? And we've obviously covered a few. Make sure you know the name of the person. Make sure if you agree to a comment. But is there anything else that you can feedback to today's attendees?
One thing that bothers me is just poorly thought out press release. So quite often there'll be a big announcement or the big news story of the day, and we'll be writing a story about it, and we're quite often offered quotes, which is great to use. I'm a big fan of getting other voices into our copy, but then you'll get such a long, like 500-word quote, and it's got footnotes, and we can't use it. So you need a rapid response. You need something that's digestible as well. Space isn't.
Just building on that point, I always try to anything breaking. I always suggest kind of like 3 or 4 paragraphs max.
Absolutely. Yes,
pack it full of opinion rather than any kind of regurgitation of facts, because those will be further up in the article. Any other kind of thoughts?
Well, I would say actually the best quotes are the shortest ones because they're more incisive, as long as they're saying something new and different. So short is good often.
Yeah, you can always take a short, snappy quote in a press release, and I can look at that and think, oh, well, I can approach them and get 2,000 words of commentary out of it. Just don't send me 2,000 words in a quote.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, I agree.
So what I want to do now is just kind of go through any, we've covered quite a few different points there, of which I will summarize for attendees post event and fire them across as a bit of a blueprint from what you guys say, what you've said on today's webinar. I want to go back to the first kind of bit that we discussed, because a few of the attendees today will never have kind of contacted journalists before, or when you're first kind of contacting a journalist, what would your recommendations be? Would you have an initial contact and say, hi, we're X firm and this is what we specialize in, or would you just go straight in, here's a press release, or here's a comment? What would you recommend to build that initial relationship?
I always think that some sort of introduction is helpful. It helps me to know who I'm dealing with and what they're offering, where they're coming from, rather than just, here's a story, what do you think? Give us a call.
Yes, I would agree with that, especially as you're saying in the case of a first approach. And what one's interested in is what's the USP? Because there was as you say, it's a very, very crowded market out there. You want to know what is special about this new outfit. And that's going back to something I said earlier. You do have a number of startups, but startups based on lawyers of long experience who have decided, for whatever reason, to go it alone. One's interested in what their private experience and track record is.
Yes, I mean, I always make sure I have a conversation with someone before commissioning them after the introduction, just to find out more about them. I mean, for the product I work with, it's always really good if we have people who are lawyers who are, say, former regulators or have worked in-house. Then they're going to be able to bring a lot more to an opinion piece, and you can usually only find that out just through chatting through with them, because people don't always give you that information.
Okay, bro.
It definitely helps to be able to build a relationship with the law firm, because then you know what they're offering and what you can get out of them.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
So I guess taking you for a beer doesn't.
That was old school. Old school. We used to go out for beers years ago.
I've certainly done it in the past, and it's always built better relationships with journalists.
Have a fun of that. I think it works. Apart from the conflict of interest.
So one of the
so there is just a bigger point going back to almost where we started. I think firms really have to decide what their position is going to be in the public debating space. And what I would argue is that if you're a large law firm, an international law firm with that enormous amount of expertise and insight and knowledge and contacts, these days you almost have a responsibility, a corporate social responsibility, to be a part of that debate on the big issues. And I think that would be my plea really to firms as life gets more and more difficult, more and more litigation based. So we want, whether that be in the specialist market or the general market, we want to have access to your understanding. And that's kind of an argument I would put to the bigger law firms, certainly, and maybe those who've got specialist interests as well. We want to hear from you. Almost, we need to hear from you.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. That one of my next questions is actually going to be around that, because I think you'll get emails all day, every day, I assume, from various different law firms. What is the best way to follow up? Because one of the things I'm always conscious of, if you've sent a piece that you think is absolutely brilliant, and then you don't hear back for a few days, how would you suggest that people follow up? Because obviously there is so many emails coming across to you all the time.
I would say it's always worth doing a follow-up. I think, like you say, people get so many emails now that it's possible, with the best of intentions, to just overlook something or read it and forget to reply. So it's a fine line, but yeah, I think if you don't follow up, you risk not building that relationship. So it's always worth it. At the very worst, I or Edward or Jean will say, this isn't for us, but you'll learn that way. Yeah. Or you might say, this isn't for us, but you might have something else, or this could work this way. So yeah, always follow up.
Okay, Brill. And kind of just else, I'd imagine, is a follow-up or, you know,
I mean, certainly there were some PR firms, agencies who would send an email and half an hour later they, have you got it? When you're going to use it? And that was irritating, I'm afraid. So it is a matter, as Ed said, it's a fine line how you follow up. It is worth doing if you really think it's very important, but please don't phone up.
Okay, so don't phone.
No. I'll phone you.
And just make sure that you're on topic as well, because often one of the reasons, you know, that, you know, may not come back to someone straight away, it's because it's general, it's too general. And, you know, it's really worth making the time when you write a press release, write it for each place you're sending it to make sure, you know, that you're writing to their audience rather than just a general piece, you know.
Yeah, a generic press release quite off-putting.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay, so if you're sending out a piece to a journalist, try to write a personalized email rather than
I think it's basic courtesy as well.
Software out there. Okay, brilliant. So we've obviously covered quite a bit there, and I don't want to go over many of the points we've made. So I guess what I'd like to do is kind of ask you a bit of a final question to all three of you. As we kind of touched on in the beginning, you all sent content regularly. Have you got any kind of final pieces of advice? You know, if you were sat in, you know, the shoes of a communications professional or a senior lawyer who wanted to get more coverage and really boost their media profile, you know, what would be your golden advice, really?
Not sure about golden advice, but one thing that's useful and I think is often overlooked is not just to react to events that have taken place or announcements, but to look ahead and think about what's coming up, what's on the horizon. Is there some, you know, new regulation or enforcement coming in? Is there an anniversary of something? I think I've got some commentary, I had some commentary quite recently about, it was an anniversary of some cannabis law being enacted, I think possibly in Canada. So that's making commentary because it's pegged to something. So look ahead, look to be a bit creative and see what's coming up that you can tie something to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because I've personally had a lot of success with law firms that I work with, looking ahead and looking at something that perhaps not in the news agenda now, but you know, you can alert, you know, journalists to something that is potentially coming up and really lead the conversation on that specific issue. You know, there's quite a few examples of that I've worked on in the recent months, and it really has been effective in terms of you get on the radar early, and then any time when the news does break, you are at the forefront and, you know, commenting and etc.
Just try to be a bit creative. I get offered quite a lot of commentary on, say, money laundering, but I've been offered some recently on money laundering and how it affects the art market, which is really refreshing. It's nice to get something just a little bit out of the ordinary, and that should make a nice read. So yeah, think laterally.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, and certainly with some of my trusted commentators, they would say, exactly as Ed has just said, that such and such new piece of legislation or regulation will kick in 4 weeks' time, and if it then seems significant enough, it gives me the opportunity to think about it, talk to other people as well, and then bang, you're on target. You know, so certainly worth doing. It also demonstrates authority, which is something we talked about earlier. That if the firm is thinking ahead and sharing that with us, that reinforces a sense of authority.
Jean, do you have anything else to add?
Well, yeah, it's just the same things really. You know, be specific about what's going to happen. You know, be aware of what's happening around us at the time. You know, so I mean, for the US elections, I mean, no matter what you're writing about, you should have that in your mind, that depending on who gets in, you know, it could be a different view what could happen, you know, down the line. And, you know, for me, I specifically like something where you actually offer some best practice and tips going forward. So if you're a compliance officer and there's going to be, because you can tell from the way the FCA has been doing a lot of enforcements that you might need to get some more people on board, they can give this information to their board and get some more money. And, improve the job they're doing. So it's about just offering people information so they can, do their jobs better as well.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. There's nothing else to add. What I want to do now is jump on to some of the questions that we've had come in throughout the session. So I'm going to kick off with Ashley Reynolds. Do you have any time-saving tips when sending out press releases to journalists? Searching for journalists manually is very time-consuming. Are there databases, for example, that can help find legal journalists? I actually might be able to answer this question, but do you guys have any thoughts on that specific point?
I'm not sure I have. Very sorry. No.
So in answer to your question, there is databases out there, believe it or not. A couple to look at are Gorkana and Response Source. Response Source, I believe, is updated quite regularly. Twitter is always a good resource to find journalists. And in addition, I would research your competitors. Where are your competitors being featured? What publications? What journalists? What types of things are they writing about? And you can often find the journalists to contact using that resource.
Also, if you read the publications.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you read the publications, then you'll know where your work's better suited.
Absolutely. Sorry, just cut out there. There's another question here, which I believe we might have already answered. Would it be better to introduce our firm to you now to keep you on our database? I guess that relates to, there might not be a story in the news now that can be commented on from a specific law firm, but, is it worth just, if you're going into this activity, reaching out and, introducing, but I think we kind of already answered that one.
I think probably would be. Yeah.
If a law firm's not got anything to pitch to me, I would wait and make an introduction when you've got something.
Okay.
Something to
So
offer.
wait until the time comes. Another question from Lucy here: are there any date pegs that happen year on year that you need comment for, that we can plan for? I guess this question relates to, if I can read between the lines a little bit, quite often publications will mark a particular anniversary with a piece of content. So I guess that can't help to, if it's, say, 10 years since the Bribery Act or something along those lines, having those dates in your diary to, to contact a journalist and remind them of that.
I would say, though, that from my days in general news, if it's Halloween, don't send a Halloween-themed press release, because you'll be joining 100 other people and it won't get touched. So, I'm not too keen on things linked to dates like that.
I would say not annually, but things like the American election or the UK elections would be obvious ones, that you would be preparing for that some time in advance. So big events, big national, international events, certainly.
Brexit, getting to the Brexit transition, things
indeed.
like that, big landmarks.
Yes, indeed.
You can also look at regulatory diaries. So, for instance, with the FCA, the Financial Conduct.
Sorry, G.
Regulatory diaries. So some of the biggest, like the FCA, or they'll put out a diary of what's going to be published over the next week. So you could go a week ahead.
Yeah. And that, on that point as well, you can often find a lot of stories from, FCA, SFO websites, press releases, and looking at the news, and giving your take on those breaking pieces of news as well is always a good way to find something to comment on. I've got another question here from Johnny Silcock. Is there a standout story that you've worked on that's come via PR?
There probably is, but I can't think of it.
I mean, this is slightly offbeat, because at the time, as I said, we were thinking of the audience interest. I was also particularly interested as an aside really in the arts interests of lawyers and law firms. And certainly we ran a big story when Wild Gottschall installed the Anthony Gormley statue in their atrium. And we had exclusive access to that, so that was very interesting indeed. We spoke to Gormley. We got all the photographs, And that was I loved writing that story, and we were unique. We were ahead of everybody else. And if you were taught interest in the arts, that was a big story. So that stands out for me. But it's obviously atypical and not really representative of what goes on generally.
A bit of an SEO related question here in regards to backlinks. So I guess the question, it's from anonymous attendee. Our press release is still relevant for SEO and generating backlinks. I guess I mean, I know that on Law 360, for example, and on the Times, you wouldn't give a backlink to a published piece. You know, is that the case? Has that been the case forever, or? Yeah, so that's kind of linking into a law firm from the story.
We tend not to do that.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that is the case.
As far as the Times is concerned, we didn't. When I was there, no.
I
Reuters, yes.
Sorry, Jean.
So if it links back to some research, so some of the consultancies will do research on climate risk, for instance, and they will have written a bespoke piece for us. And then I will link back to their research. The original song.
So that, yeah, so I mean, I guess if you've got an asset, like a really strong asset on your website, there is a potential that, you know, a higher kind of DA website would link back into yours. Is possibly a good piece of advice there. Okay, we've got another one. How much has social media changed the landscape for you in law journalism, and do you use it as a tool for uncovering stories?
Probably best not to ask me that one, because I'm no longer a reporter and not sniffing out stories. But I know our reporters use social media.
Yeah.
I don't think you can work in news without it now.
Yeah. No, I would say it's a way of keeping one finger on the pulse, but I wouldn't say it influences me unduly. No. Okay.
Brilliant. And I think that's all the questions. Let me just have a quick final look. Yeah, that's all the questions from everyone. So. If that's everything, what I'd like to do is just wrap up and kind of say a big thank you to the panelists, Ed, Edward, and Jean. Today's webinar has been recorded, so I will circulate that in the next couple of days, and feel free to send across any questions directly to myself, or if you have any additional questions for the panelists, send them over to me and I will pass them on. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, building a media profile for yourself and lawyers in your firm, I believe, is very important, especially as we're living in such an increasingly online world and our networking opportunities are diminished. So if you found what we discussed today helpful, I hope that you can kind of adopt some of the strategies and you know, use the information that was shared today with you and to benefit your firm. I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who's attended today. Stay safe and keep in touch. Thank you very much.